Cam Newton was awful again on Thursday night. Is it time to cut and run from this guy, or should we be holding out hope that he might be able to turn this thing around? Also, Giovanni Bernard officially listed as out for this Sunday's game against the Jacksonville Jaguars. What should fantasy owners be doing about the Bengals' backfield situation? And while Tony Romo could miss Sunday night's game, we also could see the return of RG3. What do we do? This quarterback situation is getting crazy in the NFL. We've got a bunch of questions from YouTube and Twitter that I'll be going over, and I'll also give you my busts and sleepers for Week 9 of the fantasy football season. It's all on today's episode of the Fantasy Football Swagger Podcast. What is up, everybody? Welcome to the Fantasy Football Swagger Podcast. I am your host, Nick, also known as Kliquid, and I'm here twice a week to answer your questions and give you the advice that you need to win your fantasy football leagues. And we'll start this week by recapping Thursday Night Football. Cam Newton, absolutely awful again. 10 of 28 passing, 151 yards, no touchdowns, 1 interception. He did rush for 43 yards and a touchdown, which kind of saved his fantasy day, I guess, a little bit, but he looked terrible, just completely terrible. Sailed a number of passes over the head of Kelvin Benjamin, his rookie wide receiver, 6'5". This guy is one of the biggest wingspans of any receiver in the league, and Cam was overthrowing him by a wide margin on some plays. Just didn't look comfortable. I mean, obviously, if you watch the game, Kelvin Benjamin did end up dropping a touchdown, although that was probably because he was actually surprised that the ball hit him on the numbers for once this season. But, I mean, it just doesn't look good right now for Cam Newton. I don't know whether it's that he's just doesn't feel comfortable with the offensive line in front of him, or I don't know, maybe he's just this bad. I mean, if he is this bad, it's a major concern from a fantasy standpoint, because Cam Newton is supposed to be one of the most talented players in the NFL. And if he's not doing it with his legs, then he's got to do it with his arm. And I know, obviously, like I said, he did rush for 43 yards in the touchdown, which is 10.3 points, depending on your league, obviously, and how they score it. But Cam Newton, I mean, he's not doing it through the air. He really isn't. He's not completing passes. 10 for 28 is completely unacceptable from a fantasy standpoint. It's majorly concerning that he isn't going to be able to get the ball to his receivers on a consistent basis, especially guys like Kelvin Benjamin. So, I mean, to me, I look at Cam Newton right now, and I think that this is the kind of guy who, although he's been disappointing, there's no question about it, I believe that he is kind of a buy low right now, to be honest with you. I mean, the thing is, he can't be this bad. Like, I look at it, I don't know. I just don't think he could possibly be this bad. So I think that he's got to get better from here. Kelvin Benjamin, like I said, is going to continue to be a pretty good fantasy receiver, although he is going to have his down weeks like we saw on Thursday night. But Cam Newton and the Carolina offense have an extremely favorable schedule from here on out, one of the best in the entire league. And I get it if you want to sit him for the next couple of weeks here and just kind of see what happens. But to me, you look at the schedule that he has with games coming up, and it's that entire NFC South division. They're not good defensively. None of the teams are good. I mean, at one point, I remember hearing a stat that I think they were each of the 4 teams were the bottom 4 defenses in the NFL earlier this season. I mean, that's how bad they were. And that's still, they're all just terrible still. So, I mean, I look at it like this. He's got to get better from here on out. So I think you've got to look at him as a potential buy low. just given the schedule situation and the fact that, I mean, the accuracy has got to get under control at some point. He's going to get better. He's going to have his big games from here and there. I mean, yeah, he'll probably have a game or two where he gets, 10 to 12 points, which sucks from a fantasy standpoint. But if he makes up for it by throwing for 250 yards and rushing for a touchdown in a game and maybe passing for a score or two, you can deal with that, because he's going to be able to almost single-handedly win you games in situations like that. So I definitely like Cam Newton as somebody that I'm buying right now going forward. Kelvin Benjamin as well. If anybody is a little bit concerned about what he did on Thursday night and they watched the game and they didn't like the fact that Cam was overthrowing him and he dropped a touchdown, you should totally be buying on Kelvin Benjamin. He is very clearly the wide receiver one there. He's getting targeted a ton when they're in the red zone, which is obviously how you're going to make all of your money in fantasy football. So we are definitely buying Kelvin Benjamin and Cam Newton here on the Fantasy Football Swagger podcast, and I think you guys should probably follow suit with that. Now, on the other side of the football, Jimmy Graham and Mark Ingram, they are back, both of them coming back from injuries. A big game from both of these guys. Jimmy Graham caught 7 passes for 83 yards and a touchdown. He's now caught a touchdown in back-to-back games, but he definitely looked healthier this week than he did a week ago. Now, Mark Ingram, I can't say enough about how this guy is playing right now. I mean, it's incredible. This guy was just completely off fantasy radars for the most part coming into the season. He had been terrible for his first 3 NFL seasons, but he's now rushed for 100 yards for the second straight week. Also scored 2 touchdowns in this game. And, I mean, honestly, he's running like an RB1 right now for fantasy. It is what it is. When you've got a guy that's getting the ball as much as Mark Ingram is right now, Pierre Thomas isn't healthy, so he's not pulling away any carries. No one in that offense really is pulling away any touches. Kyrie Robinson's out, and there just isn't anybody to compete with him. So as long as he continues to be the RB1 there and there isn't significant contributions from other players in the offense, he is going to be a solid fantasy contributor just because New Orleans' offense is so good. Everybody's always worried about the pass. Everybody's always worried that Drew Brees is going to go for 500 on him in a game. And that just leaves open so many running lanes for a guy like Mark Ingram, who's a ground and pound, keep the ball, run for 6 yards kind of a running back. He's not going to be the guy who breaks off 70-yard runs, but he's going to consistently grind the football, and especially near the goal line. That is what you need in a fantasy football running back, is a guy who can pick up those first downs and probably also be one of the leading guys to possibly lead the NFL in touchdowns through the final, 6-7 weeks here of the regular season. So I definitely like to see that out of a guy like Mark Ingram. I mean, you've got to just love what he's been doing. You absolutely have to love it. The guy is just blowing away expectations, and that's awesome from a fantasy standpoint. And it's great to see a guy who was so prolific in college actually finally starting to put it together in the NFL. It's crazy to think that this was only his 3rd 100-yard rushing game out of his 4-year NFL career, and it's the second one in 2 weeks. So obviously you see that this guy is really trending in the right direction. And the other thing to think about here, though, with a guy like Mark Ingram is he actually going to be able to keep up this type of pace? And that's the thing that I'm a little bit worried about. I do think that he is going to get the ball a lot at the goal line, and I love that, like I said. But when Pierre Thomas does come back, and he will, when Kyrie Robinson comes back, and he will, these guys are going to get some touches. And it might not be the same type of touches that Mark Ingram gets, but it's going to be running back touches. So that is something that is a little bit of a concern from a fantasy standpoint. And there's actually a real opportunity here to sell high on Mark Ingram. I'm not trying to say that he's not going to be good for the rest of the year, but if there's a fantasy owner in your league that's hurting at running back, maybe they've, still been struggling here with trying to replace an Adrian Peterson from earlier in the year, or, a guy like LaShawn McCoy's been disappointing, or, maybe they've got a situation like Giovanni Bernard, which we're going to talk about in a moment here, where they're really desperate right now at running back. This could be the type of situation, given the fact that you really invested nothing in Mark Ingram by drafting him or picking him up off the waiver wire. This might be the situation where you drop off Mark Ingram and you get somebody really, really great in return. I think that that's something that I would be strongly looking at if I'm a Mark Ingram owner. I'm not selling low on him. I'm definitely going to be looking for a guy who is a solid contributor at whatever position that I acquire. I don't want to be trading for a guy who I have any questions about. This has to be somebody who is a guaranteed rock solid starter from here on out through the rest of the year for me to be giving up Mark Ingram. But it would be something that I would be thinking about just because I don't think he can sustain quite this type of a pace. So, next thing, like I said, that I wanted to talk about, Giovanni Bernard. Kind of a surprising one. He's going to be out this week, and it kind of caught us all by a little bit of a surprise, I think, because he's been kind of injured over the past couple of games here, but he's been able to battle through it. But he's not going to play this week. Didn't practice on Friday, and that kind of leaves the opportunity now for Jeremy Hill, the rookie running back, to start here against the Jacksonville Jaguars. I think he instantly becomes a must start from a fantasy standpoint. I mean, there's been times this year where I've actually recommended putting Jeremy Hill into your lineup even when Giovanni Bernard's been healthy. So, I mean, I have high praise for this guy. I think that he is a significant contributor from a fantasy standpoint if he's getting the ball 15 or more times in a game, like I expect him to do this week against the Jaguars. Now, what's a little bit concerning here is that the Jaguars' run defense, despite the fact that they've been an absolutely horrible team this year, they've actually been pretty okay lately against the run. They've only allowed one rushing touchdown since week 2. Which is very, very surprising to me. I had to double check that stat when I saw it. But yeah, I mean, they've been very good against the run. But that being said, I still think that it almost becomes more of a matter of circumstance, because it's not like the Jaguars defense is shutting people down. They're still allowing points on the board. They're still losing games by significant margins in a lot of cases. So I think that it really comes down to just, are the Bengals going to get down close to their end zone, and is Jeremy Hill actually going to have the opportunity to carry the ball a couple times within the 5-yard line? If he does, I don't see any reason why he shouldn't be able to get into the end zone here against the Jaguars. Their defense isn't particularly great, although the stats show that they've been good against the run. I'm not overly worried. I'm not going to be like sitting my stud running backs. And I think that that's what Jeremy Hill is. I think he's a rock solid RB2 this week. He's definitely somebody who you should be going up and picking up off of your waiver wire if for some reason he's out there. And I know he is in some leagues. I had to double check even in some of my my money leagues that I'm in. And yeah, he was available in a couple of those money leagues. So I definitely went out there, swiped him up, and I am playing him this week against the Jaguars. I would definitely recommend that if you're a Giovanni Bernard owner, from here on out, if Jeremy Hill's available for whatever reason on your waiver wire, you need to go out and pick him up first of all, but you keep him on your roster through the rest of the season, because he's the type of handcuff who, when he steps in, he can be an RB1, and that's something that you just cannot replace. He's just like a Nile Davis or another one of those type of guys who can really step in and be the stud running back, the feature back in a high-powered offense like Cincinnati. We don't know when A.J. Green is coming back yet, but when A.J. Green comes back, this is going to be a very good offense once again, and I definitely think that you want the running back there. So if Giovanni Bernard is out for more than 1 week here, Jeremy Hill instantly moves up a lot on the fantasy radar. He has to be somebody that you're going out there and trying to acquire right now. Next thing that I want to talk about here, my Dallas Cowboys and the quarterback situation. Tony Romo is out. Possibly. And I say out because I'm looking at this as being a situation where he should be out. This is not the type of game that the Dallas Cowboys should be messing around with. They're in a situation right now, the Cowboys are, where they're in a good spot to probably make the playoffs this season, barring a monumental collapse. And this week they're up against a very good, underrated Arizona team that is currently leading the NFC West. And with Tony Romo and the back injury that he suffered, it's not worth risking his health going forward to play him in this game. This is a very tough matchup against a good defense. Now, granted, their pass defense has been absolutely atrocious, but they have hit the quarterback. They have really, really hit quarterbacks hard, and they have for a couple of seasons now. So Tony Romo should not be in there this week, in my personal opinion. I would not risk him. I would try and get him healthy and try and get him back out there for the rest of the season and make sure that he's going to be as close to 100% as humanly possible from here on out. Now, right before I went and started recording today's show, I actually read an update that shows that Tony Romo has 2 fractures in his back. He has a broken back right now, ladies and gentlemen. Same thing he had last year at the end of the season that knocked him out in week 17. Week 16, obviously, they won that game against Washington, a very, very close contest. He drove them down the field for the game-winning touchdown at the end of the game. And then he was not able to play in week 17 when they were blown out and knocked out of playoff contention. So you look at it like this. Tony Romo, fractured back once again, second straight season. We don't know if it's the same exact area that's been injured, but it's a broken back. And that is not something that you can easily look past. If Tony Romo does play this week, you have to think that this is not a great fantasy matchup for him, despite the fact that Arizona's defense has been very, very bad against the pass. Tony Romo being that injured is not good from a fantasy standpoint. It's not something where you automatically bench him or anything like that. And I know there are going to be a lot of people out there who, if he plays, he's in your lineup just because there's not better options on the waiver wire. I understand that. But if you've got other options, if you've got a Carson Palmer, if you have a Brian Hoyer, if you have guys like this, I would be very strongly recommending that you sit Tony Romo this week if he does play. Obviously, if he doesn't play, he shouldn't be in your lineup, duh. But Brandon Weeden, I don't know. He looked good in the short period of time that he was out there, but we know what Brandon Weeden is. This guy is a career backup quarterback, should have been drafted way later than he was. Just absurd. The fact that he was drafted in the first round in an NFL draft at his age is just beyond any realm of even being moderately legitimate. But anyway, he's now the backup quarterback for the Cowboys. I think that he's an okay to solid, I don't know. He's an okay backup quarterback. I don't love the guy, but I do think that he's good enough that you still start your Des Bryants, that you still start your Jason Wittens. But a Terrence Williams, I think, takes a pretty significant hit if Brandon Weeden is in at quarterback. And even if Tony Romo is in and he's injured, I think Terrence Williams is the kind of guy that I'm probably not playing this week just because he's more of a deep threat. He's more of a guy who relies on the big play and the touchdown to get his fantasy value. And unless he's doing those things, unless he's beating a defense deep, I don't know. I don't really think that he has a lot of fantasy value here. And I'm not sure that Brandon Weeden is going to be able to get him the ball down the field for a touchdown in this one. So I'm probably sitting my Terrence Williams. The nice thing about this whole situation is that the Cowboys do play in an early game. So if you have other decisions to make at quarterback, you should be able to find out whether Tony Romo is going to play and whether, Brandon Weeden is going to be in or whatever the situation is. If we hear tomorrow that the fractured back situation is not quite as bad as what it's been sounding like, at least, then maybe we change our opinion here on Tony Romo. But I'm going with the assumption that a fractured back really does mean a broken back. And I mean, obviously it's not enough to paralyze him or anything like that, but any sort of broken bones in your back is not a good thing. I just can't imagine that being even at all comfortable for throwing the football. And that's the other thing too. A lot of people don't realize that a lot of your passing goes through your back and not your arm. And if Tony Romo is wrenching his back to try and get the ball down the field to Terrence Williams and he re-injures his back, this could be a lost season for the Dallas Cowboys, despite the fact that at one point they were being hailed as the best team in football this season. So the Cowboys would be wise to bench Tony Romo, and from a fantasy standpoint, I think that everyone would be wise to look elsewhere for a fantasy quarterback this week. Now, a player that a lot of people are looking at as a potential replacement for Tony Romo this week is Robert Griffin III. Now, this is going to instantly cause controversy because we don't necessarily know if he's actually going to be starting. Same thing as Tony Romo, though. It sounds like we'll know on Sunday morning whether Robert Griffin III or Colt McCoy is going to start for the Washington Redskins. But Colt McCoy has actually played fairly well, and he even led them to a victory over the Cowboys. So, I mean, it's kind of surprising right now that they're so quick to actually go over and make a move to put RG3 back in the lineup. This guy has not been good even when he's been healthy. But I guess, it's one of those things where, like I've mentioned before, NFL coaches are really not willing to bench players based off of injuries. It does not happen very often. You see guys, even when they've been performing bad, they get injured, and then once they're healthy again, even if the other guys performed well in relief, they get their job back. And I think that that's a pretty likely outcome here. I do think that RG3, if he's healthy, will be the starter. I still do think that this is RG3's team. As disgusting as that sounds, it appears to be that way. So what does it mean from a fantasy standpoint? Well, RG3, obviously the legs are really what we hope for. And that's the thing. We don't really know if he's going to be able to run the ball. If he's not mobile, then this is not an offense that I want really anything to do with. Because if he's not running the ball with the athleticism that he has, that's really the best attribute that Robert Griffin III has. Now, he obviously has a big arm. He's not necessarily super accurate at throwing down the field, but, I mean, he's got the big cannon arm, and he can get the ball deep to a guy like Deshaun Jackson. But if he's not moving around in the pocket, if he's not breaking tackles, if he's not making defenses just think about the fact that he might run the ball, it's very, very tough for a guy like Alfred Morris to find holes in the defense to run through. So I think that that's a real concern here. I do think that if RG3 is back and he's healthy and he's looking good, this could mean really good things for Alfred Morris. We've seen him have monster numbers with a healthy RG3 and an RG3 who's willing to run the ball. But if he's not willing to run the ball, if he's slow in the backfield and he's not running around very much, this could be real tough. This could be tough not just for RG3, not just for Alfred Morris, but also for all the receivers in this offense. Pierre Garçon, Deshaun Jackson, Niles Paul, Jordan Reed, all these guys. I'm not sure. We're really going to have to wait and see. And from a fantasy standpoint, I would not be playing RG3 this week. Obviously, I know he's got a good matchup against the Vikings, but they are on the road. And it's not necessarily a super hostile environment in a college football stadium that the Vikings are in temporarily, but still, you don't necessarily like to play guys on the road. It's cold here in Minnesota right now, where I'm recording the podcast from. I'm about 15 minutes away from where they'll be playing this game tomorrow. It's cold out. It's real cold. And for a guy like RG3, he's going to play better in the warm weather. That's just all there is to it. Just his playing style is going to be better for warm weather. So I don't love this situation this week. I want to wait a week and see what happens before I start placing RG3 back in my fantasy lineup. I still think you're probably playing your receivers in this one, and you're probably still playing Alfred Morris, but your expectations have to be minimal at this point for these guys because it's not a great situation right now. We just don't know how healthy RG3 is. So RG3, not somebody that I would be looking at replacing Tony Romo with. I would be more, like I said, going with a guy like Brian Hoyer or somebody like that, Ryan Tannehill, who might still be on your fantasy waiver wire at this point in the season. Now, another guy who is also doubtful for this weekend's games, Doug Martin. Tampa Bay Buccaneers running back is doubtful, and that likely means that we're going to see Bobby Rainey get another start here as they go up against the Cleveland Browns. Not a particularly great matchup, not a terrible one, but the Browns are okay on defense. Now, the one thing that we're excited about here from a fantasy standpoint is that it looks like rookie Charles Sims is going to be active, and he should get his first work of the season this year. This guy has had a lot of hype. He got injured in the preseason, and he's finally active here going into week 9. This guy was a third-round draft pick this season, so obviously they saw something in him, despite the fact that they had production out of Doug Martin, they've had production out of Bobby Rainey, and they've had production out of other guys as well in that Tampa Bay backfield. They still went out there in the NFL draft this year and drafted Charles Sims. So I still think that there is a real possibility that Charles Sims ends up being the running back on this team going forward this season. I wouldn't trust him in my lineup yet, but I would pay a lot of attention to how he looks. If you're in a deeper league, I would be out there right now picking up Charles Sims before this game starts, because if he goes off, he's going to be very, very difficult to come by. So I really, really would right now go out there and pick him up. Don't play him yet. See what happens. If he looks good, if he performs well, then yes, maybe we do place him in our lineups going forward, again, because he's in that NFC South and there's some terrible defenses that he's going to get to go up against, such as Atlanta, and Carolina has not been good, and New Orleans has not been good. Great opportunities for a guy like Charles Sims to really break out at the end of the season, especially if you're in a keeper league. I would be going balls to the wall trying to get Charles Sims right now, because it looks like there's a real good chance that he could be the running back on this team going forward. So guys, let's hop in now and talk a little bit about the fantasy questions that you guys have sent in to me. And I really do appreciate all the questions that you guys send. It seems like more and more every week, and I apologize if I don't get to all of them today. I will try my best to reply in the comments or in your tweets to any questions that you guys have that I do not answer this week. Obviously, if you start tweeting me 6 minutes before the games on Sunday, I'm not going to probably be able to respond to you, but I will do my best. If you guys send me a tweet tonight, which is Saturday night, or anytime Sunday morning, I will do my absolute best to respond to those. I'll do my best to also respond in the comments section of my YouTube videos. If you guys do want to send me a question on Twitter, make sure you send it to me at Kliquid TV, and that's how you will get in contact with me. So let's start things off here from BBud10029 on Twitter, and he wants to know, should I trade Marshawn Lynch and Jimmy Graham for Mark Ingram, T.Y. Hilton, and Antonio Gates? He also wants to let me know that he has Gronkowski also at tight end in addition to Jimmy Graham, and he also has Matt Forte, Ben Tate, and Ronnie Hillman at running back. So the position that he is thin at here is wide receiver. So he's going to be receiving T.Y. Hilton in this trade, in addition to Mark Ingram and Antonio Gates, while he gives up Marshawn Lynch and Jimmy Graham. Now, if we're redrafting right now, I think that the top players drafted right now would be Marshawn Lynch and Jimmy Graham, who are the two players that you are giving up in this trade. Now, you are receiving Mark Ingram, T.Y. Hilton, and Antonio Gates, who I think are still solid every week starters at this point, but I think you're probably giving up the two best players in the draft. Obviously, you might be able to make a case that a guy like T.Y. Hilton right now could possibly jump over Marshawn Lynch, just given the fact that Hilton has been on such a hot streak. But, you know, you're splitting hairs at that point. I think Jimmy Graham's very clearly the top player in this draft, or in this situation of this trade. So I never like to be the person who's giving up the best two players in any trade that I make. I can give up the best player if it means that I'm getting depth in an area that I need depth in. But if I'm giving up the best two players in a trade, we're probably not talking anymore. And I think that's kind of what you're doing here. Now, what I would tell you is that I would be looking for more of a straight-up deal. You've told me that you have Jimmy Graham and Rob Gronkowski on your roster. So right now you're playing one of them as your flex. So normally I'm okay with that, but what I will tell you is that the real value that guys like Rob Gronkowski and Jimmy Graham have are that they play such a thin position at tight end. So you're always going to have the advantage when you've got a Rob Gronkowski or a Jimmy Graham at tight end versus another person's tight ends. Well, unless they've got Julius Thomas. But other than that, you compare Jimmy Graham or Rob Gronkowski to any other tight end, and you've got the advantage. So that's obviously a huge thing for you, because every single week you're getting a point differential advantage over your opponent. Now, when you start putting one of those guys like a Rob Gronkowski at your flex, you're not getting quite as big of a differential, because people are able to play like, a running back against a terrible defense. And that makes things very, very different. So I don't like these guys playing in your flex position. What I would be saying is that I would be looking to trade either Rob Gronkowski or Jimmy Graham straight up for a wide receiver. If that's the position that you're thin at and you're so stacked at tight end, I would be looking to make that type of a trade. And for Gronkowski and Graham, you can almost have your pick of the litter. I mean, you're probably not going to get a Demaryius Thomas. You're probably not going to get a guy like an Antonio Brown or something like that, a Jordy Nelson. But you can pretty much get your pick of the litter besides that for the most part. I would think that you should be able to trade Jimmy Graham or Rob Gronkowski for an Emmanuel Sanders, for example, or a Jeremy Maclin or a Randall Cobb, or, you know, a guy like that who is a solid wide receiver one, but maybe not quite at that top 3, top 4 type of level. So I would be probably looking to make that type of a trade versus making a trade where I'm just going to be giving up 2 of the best players in the trade. I want to keep Marshawn Lynch. I want to keep Matt Forte. And then I'm going to keep Jimmy Graham or Rob Gronkowski as my tight end and really boost up my wide receiver one spot just by giving up one of those tight ends. So I hope that helps you out. Good luck with that trade. Next question comes from at Chimichangas on Twitter, and he asks, should I trade away Rob Gronkowski for Jeremy Maclin? Now, again here, this is the type of trade, like I just mentioned, you could definitely trade a Rob Gronkowski for a Jeremy Maclin, and I think that's an okay trade. But the situation really has to be dictated by what your roster looks like. If you can go out there and you can find a decent tight end on the waiver wire, if a guy like a Travis Kelce is available, players like that, I would be looking at those type of guys as potential pickups in my fantasy league if I'm giving up a Rob Gronkowski, because I'm imagining that you don't have a lot of depth at your tight end position. But overall, if you're in desperate need for a wide receiver, I don't mind this trade. Go ahead and make it. I don't think that there's necessarily going to be a huge difference between these two players. I think that they're very similar in value. It's a very fair trade right now, in my personal opinion. So I'm totally okay with doing that so long as you're going to be able to find a decent tight end. If you can't find anybody, if you've got to start a Charles Clay or a Jared Cook or something like that from here on out at tight end, probably not. I'm probably not making the trade. I'm probably going to try and find somebody else out there for me to trade with, and maybe I can give up my depth at another position to try and get a slight upgrade at wide receiver. But I'm just not a big fan of trading away an elite tight end just to get a wide receiver, even if it is somebody as good as Jeremy Maclin. You don't want to leave a huge hole in your roster like that. So next question comes from at Big NBA Live Fan. I love that username. That's pretty funny. But he asks, AJ Green or Jeremy Maclin from here on out? So again, we're talking about Jeremy Maclin here, who has been an absolute beast. I can't believe I'm saying this, but I'm probably going with Jeremy Maclin. He's currently the number 6 fantasy wide receiver in standard scoring formats. He only has 2 games this year where he didn't reach double-digit points in standard scoring leagues. So he's either getting a touchdown or 100 yards in most weeks. So that's pretty damn impressive. I definitely like to see that out of my receiver. That consistency is very, very important. He had the biggest game of his season this past week, and I don't really see a whole lot of reason for him to be dropping off from here on out. Now, what I will tell you is that AJ Green probably has more of an upside. When he comes back, AJ Green is going to be a beast, I imagine. But the question is, we don't know when he's going to come back. We do not know also if he comes back, if he's going to be the same AJ Green. So he could very well be a top 3 wide receiver, or he could come back and be slowed by that toe and just not be the same guy that we've expected. So it's a tough one. It really is. But the thing is I'm going to go with the guy who's been good and doesn't really show any signs of dropping off. I looked at it. I had to make sure before I made you this proposal here, before I answered your question. But I do think that I'm going to go with Jeremy Maclin, just given the fact that he's getting as many targets as other elite receivers. He's right in the same range as guys like Demaryius Thomas, Jordy Nelson, Dez Bryant in terms of targets. And that's really what we're looking for. If he only had 50 targets right now, I would not be very confident in a guy like Jeremy Maclin, just because he's not getting that the type of reps that he needs to be a quality player. But because he is, I'm very confident that he's going to continue to be a productive fantasy wide receiver and a solid wide receiver one, probably a low-end wide receiver one, but still definitely good enough to be in your lineup every single week, and I would trust him over an AJ Green from here on out. Next question comes from at Snapification on Twitter, and he asks, should I trade away Andre Ellington to get Julio Jones in a standard scoring league? And again, guys, it really comes down to the makeup of your roster. Without knowing what your roster looks like, I can't really answer this question very well. But what I can tell you is that in a bubble, I would rather have Julio Jones. So if I don't know what the hell is going on with the rest of your roster, if I'm redrafting right now with a blank canvas, I'm taking Julio Jones above Andre Ellington. And I know that that's a little bit surprising given the fact that Julio has been struggling lately, but the dude just has insane talent. He's getting targeted still. He's still the wide receiver 1 in Atlanta, and I still think that he's going to be a productive player from here on out. What's crazy is that despite the fact that he's had 3 straight disappointing games, he's still a top 10 fantasy wide receiver right now. So I don't see what there is to dislike about Julio Jones. I only think he's going to get better from here on out. Andre Ellington, although I still like him, I think that he's more valuable in a PPR league. If this was a standard score, if this wasn't a standard scoring league and it was a PPR league, I might actually go the way of Andre Ellington. And I know that's crazy because I think Julio Jones' value goes up in a PPR as well. But Andre Ellington is the kind of guy who could catch 60, 70 passes this season. And he's the kind of guy that could catch 5 to 6 per game from here on out. And at the running back position, that's a lot tougher to do than it is at wide receiver. So he gets a bigger upgrade in PPR than Julio Jones does, if that makes sense. Next question comes from Corbin Johnson on YouTube, and he asks, should I give up Joe Flacco, Brandon Marshall, and Andre Johnson for Cam Newton and AJ Green? Now, I'm going to say no on this. And that's because I think that Brandon Marshall will turn it around from here on out. And I know he's been tough to predict. Jay Cutler's been bad lately. And the other thing, though, is that we just don't really know what A.J. Green's going to do when he comes back, like we've already talked about here. A.J. Green and Brandon Marshall, I think, have a lot of the same question marks right now. But the thing is that A.J. Green's question marks have more to do with health than they do just the general outlook of the offense. So I think that A.J. Green, I have more concerns about right now than I do Brandon Marshall. And when you're giving up Joe Flacco and Andre Johnson for Cam Newton, Joe Flacco, I understand, hasn't been very good. I get it. He's had the one monster game, and other than that, he's just been meh. He's been Joe Flacco. But Cam Newton has been bad lately. And I know I was talking about that I think he's a potential buy low, but I don't want to be giving up Brandon Marshall to get him. I think Cam Newton's the kind of guy that right now you shouldn't have to trade that much for. You really shouldn't. I mean, if you're doing just Joe Flacco and Andre Johnson for Cam Newton, I think I would probably be more okay with that. But I would like to just be able to make, just that portion of the trade versus giving up Brandon Marshall for AJ Green, because I still think I'm more comfortable with Brandon Marshall than I am AJ Green going forward. Next question comes from Evan Wiseman on YouTube, and he asks, is it time to sell high on DeMarco Murray? I need a good wide receiver 1. What could I get for him? Well, I don't know. To be completely honest with you, as far as selling high on him, I mean, obviously it comes down to what other people in your league are willing to give you for him. I think if we're redrafting right now, if for the rest of the season, and given the fact that we know that the Dallas Cowboys are going to have to run the football still over the next couple of weeks, especially with Romo being hurt, I think DeMarco Murray would probably be the number 1 overall fantasy football draft pick if we're redrafting right now. So that should say a lot. This guy has insane value. If you're doing a straight up trade, you should be able to get anyone in the world that you want, period. I mean, there really shouldn't be anybody that would turn down a trade for DeMarco Murray right now, pretty much no matter what their lineup looks like. So I think that what I would say is that if you're going to give up DeMarco Murray, you should be willing to trade him only if you're going to be getting an RB1 and a wide receiver. So, or at least a high-end RB2 and a wide receiver 1. I'm going to need 2 very, very good players, 2 every week starters if I'm going to be giving up the number 1 overall player. I wouldn't be jumping to trade DeMarco Murray right now because there really isn't anything that looks like he's going to drop off significantly. Now, I don't expect him to run for 100 yards in every single game this season like he has so far, and he's probably going to drop off a little bit on pace, but I still think that he is probably the RB1 in fantasy football for the remainder of the season, so don't be willing to give that away for very cheap. If other people are interested, go ahead and trade him away, but make sure that you're getting enough in return that you're going to be comfortable with it and you're still going to have 2 every week starters. You need to be able to upgrade at wide receiver pretty significantly and not take a massive drop off at running back. So hopefully that helps you out. I can't really give you specifics on who you could trade him for because, like I said, you should be able to trade him for anybody. So if you could get a Randall Cobb and let's say an Eddie Lacy or a LaShawn McCoy and Jordy Nelson or something like that, I would be willing to make that type of a trade. But other than that, I'm really not willing to just give away DeMarco Murray. I think, like I said, you have to be willing to take only a trade that is going to significantly upgrade your team. Otherwise, what's the point? Let's just keep riding the hot hand and getting huge fantasy points from him every single week. So, next thing that I want to do here is a little bit of a lightning round. So I'm going to answer just these questions fairly quickly without going into huge depth on them. And they're start-sit type of questions. So who should I play type of questions here for week 9. First one comes from Beast Gone Gamer on YouTube, and he asks, Ahmad Bradshaw or Ben Tate in a half-point per reception league? I'm going to go with Ahmad Bradshaw. He's been absolutely killing it lately. Ben Tate's been awful against bad defenses. So the upside of Ahmad Bradshaw right now is significantly better in my opinion. I'm going with him. Next question from D. Dwayne 17899 on YouTube, and he asks, Brandon LaFell, Michael Crabtree, or Doug Baldwin here in week 9? Now, Brandon LaFell's definitely been the hottest of this group, but he's up against a very good Denver cornerback duo with Aqib Talib and Chris Harris. Michael Crabtree's a no until he proves us otherwise. You can't start him right now. And Doug Baldwin is against a pretty bad Oakland defense, so I'm going to go with Doug Baldwin. I think that he's got the best opportunity to have a good game this week, and that's who I'm going to go with. Next question comes from Merc Rogue X on YouTube, and he asks LaShawn McCoy or Chris Ivory. And I'm going to go with LaShawn McCoy because of upside. Chris Ivory, I still think, is going to have to concede some carries to Chris Johnson, and that offense as a whole is going to be interesting to see, let's say, to say the very least. With Mike Vick at quarterback, we don't really know what we're expecting to see at this point. There could be a lot more designed quarterback runs, which could mean less opportunities for Chris Ivory. So I am going to go with LaShawn McCoy. Doug Baldwin or Mohamed Sanu? Now, I just in the last question said that I would go with Doug Baldwin, but Mohamed Sanu, I think, is the guy that I'm going to go with unless A.J. Green plays here. Mohamed Sanu's been red hot with Andy Dalton. They've been connecting and making big plays. He's had quite a few big games with A.J. Green on the sidelines, so that's who I'm going to go with unless A.J. Green plays, and then I'm probably going to sit him for Doug Baldwin. Next question from Nobama 10100 on YouTube, and he asks, call me crazy, but I think I'm going to start Mike Vick over Andrew Luck and Phillip Rivers. Okay, you're crazy. You're not just crazy, you're insane. Mike Vick is exciting, but Andrew Luck is literally the number 1 overall scorer in fantasy football this season, not just at quarterback, at all positions. He's the number 1 guy ahead of Peyton Manning. You do not bench him. Period. You do not bench him. Trade away Phillip Rivers right now. Get something good for Phillip Rivers. Keep Andrew Luck, and don't even think about Mike Vick unless for some reason Andrew Luck gets hurt. I don't want to hear it. Andrew Luck is your starting quarterback from here on out. If you want to keep Phillip Rivers for Andrew Luck's bye week, then fine, but do not come at me with any Mike Vick conversation right now. He should not be on your roster unless you're trading away one of those other quarterbacks to get something and upgrade at another position. So, that's going to be it for the questions this week. I hope that you guys learned something. If you did, be sure to hit that like button below. If you got your question answered, I would appreciate some support on that. Thank you guys as always. And now I do also want to give you guys my busts and my sleepers for this week here in week 9. So my sleeper of the week, and this is a guy who is not normally in your starting fantasy football lineup, but I think that he should be. And then the bust obviously is going to be the opposite of that, a guy who is normally in your lineup, but should not be this week. So sleeper of the week, Jace Amaro, tight end of the New York Jets against the Kansas City Chiefs. Now, I know I just mentioned that we don't really know what the Jets offense is going to look like, and Mike Vick is not somebody I would be rostering if I have Andrew Luck and Phillip Rivers. But if I'm in the situation where I'm thin at tight end, like half the league is right now in fantasy football, because there's only about 5 pretty solid tight ends and everybody else is just kind of a crapshoot on a week-to-week basis, I'm looking at Jace Amaro this week as a very good option here against the Kansas City Chiefs. Mike Vick behind center, he loves throwing to tight ends. We've seen it time and time again over the course of his career. He actually threw 5 passes for 51 yards to Jace Amaro in the 3 quarters that they played together last week. And that was without significant time together. They hadn't really practiced. So I definitely think that I like his opportunity this week. Mike Vick, like I said, loves throwing to that tight end position. It's a short to intermediate throw for him, and it's one that he can make pretty easily. Despite the fact that we know he has a huge arm for going deep, he's kind of better at throwing like that 8 to 10 yard passing route when he's on a bootleg or something like that. And that's where Jace Amaro can make a significant contribution in this offense this week. I like him for 5 to 7 catches this week, and he could sneak into the end zone. So from a fantasy standpoint, at a very thin tight end position, I think he's a great option this week. Now, my bust of the week, and again, this is somebody who normally is in your lineup, but probably shouldn't be, and that's Jerick McKinnon of the Minnesota Vikings against the Washington Redskins. I have been a big fan of McKinnon's ever since I saw the opportunity for him to get that starting job in Minnesota when Matt Asiata started to struggle. Jerick McKinnon looked very, very good. He's been good lately. I mean, he really has. He's been producing, and that's why it's tough to say that he's a bust this week. But in my opinion, it's a very tough matchup for him. Washington has been a top 5 run defense this season, which I don't think a lot of people realize. Now, they did struggle, obviously, a little bit against DeMarco Murray, but who hasn't? I mean, DeMarco Murray's run for 100 yards in every single game this season, so that's not really anything that I'm overly worried about. But the thing is, if you're going to attack Washington, it has to be through the air. Many teams have beaten up the Redskins defense through the air, so I expect that that's what the Vikings will try to do this week. I do think that that could mean 5 passes, 4 to 5 pass receptions for Jerick McKinnon, but I'm not sure that's going to be enough to make him a great play in standard scoring leagues this week. Even in your PPR leagues, if he catches 4 to 5 passes and only, gets 30 yards off of those, that's 8 points, and I only expect him to get, 40 to 50 yards rushing, and I don't expect him to get into the end zone this week. So not a great fantasy day, and especially if you're in a non-PPR league, that pretty much drops him off to the point where he's not really start worthy. So I have him ranked about 30th this week at running back, and I know that seems very, very low, but he is not in my starting lineup type of ranking this week at running back. So hopefully that helps you guys out. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Thank you all so much for tuning in. I really do hope that you enjoyed it. If you did, or if you learned something, please be sure to hit that like button below, and please be sure to subscribe to the channel if you are new, because that's how you'll be updated when I put out a new video. If you guys have any questions about your lineup for this weekend's games, like I said, be sure to hit that like button and also leave it in the comment section below. Let me know in the comment section what type of questions that you have. If you're looking for a start-sit type of thing, or if you're in a last-minute trade situation, let me know, and I will try to answer those in the comment section. Or you can always tweet them to me at Kliquid TV, and I'll do my best to get back to you guys before Sunday morning's games. Thank you guys so much for listening. Check back next week for a recap of Week 9 and some predictions for the rest of the seasons here on the Fantasy Football Swagger Podcast.